Hello, everyone. Welcome to Harvard Extension School's Creative Writing and Literature Student Society. I am Natalie Zender, your president, and I am so excited to have here our guest alumni author spotlight, Christine Boyer. And yeah, a round of applause. So happy here and excited to dive into her murder mystery novel called Black Maria. Right here, I have the print that's kind of disappearing in the background, but it's real, I promise. um, but yes, without further ado, I want to present Christine, and she's going to introduce herself, and then we can start the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is a real treat. Um, so my name is Christine Boyer. I am originally from Pennsylvania, but I live in Massachusetts now. I graduated from the Harvard Extension School in 2024 with my graduate degree in creative writing. While I've published short stories and poetry in the past few years, Black Mariah is my first novel, my debut, and it came out in October of last year. And I do want to point out, so no one is disappointed, there are other Christine Boyers out there who are writers. So I am the Christine Boyer who wrote Black Mariah, the murder mystery. There's an M. Christine Boyer who is a professor at Princeton, and she's a professor of urbanism. And there's also a Christine Boyer who's a French romance author. So if you're here to hear about like the history of urban planning or romance during the reign of the Sun King, like now is your chance to sort of hop off the ride. But it's been as a debut author, there's been confusion because those two Christine Boyers have published books as well. So there's been, sort of back and forth with Goodreads and Amazon because there was some cross-pollination with all of our books. So just to clear that.
I love that. That's so funny. Yeah, I think I don't know if I'm doing the math right, but it sounds like you published your book right after you graduated or right before.
I graduated in May, and so it was already sort of in the editorial phase, and then it came out in October of the same year.
That's like every writer's dream, like perfect timing. How did you make that happen?
It was probably just dumb luck, I think. I had written a short story that had gotten into an anthology by this up-and-coming publisher, small indie publishing firm called Run Amok Crime. And so they were putting out an anthology, I think in 2022, called Jacked. And that was sort of their entry into, saying, hey, we're here, we're a publisher now. And so I got a short story in there in 2022, and the editor, Vern Smith, called me months later and said, hey, do you happen to have a novel as well? And I said, sure, it's not in any type of good shape. I had started a mystery story years and years ago when I was taking classes with UCLA Extension. And I said, sure, like give me, a day or two to just whip up the first 50 pages to make sure that they're good. And they were okay. So I sent them to him and he liked it. And he said, well, I'd like the whole book now. And I said, can I have a couple months to get it all in shape? And that's sort of the story of it. Just serendipity.
Wow. So there's our lesson. Always have a novel ready to go, a manuscript ready to go, because you never know when they're going to ask for the whole thing.
And
Um,
when I say it was in terrible, terrible shape, it was the most hackneyed first draft you could ever imagine. I mean, the 51st pages is what we always work on first, right? Like it's polished to perfection. But everything that was after that was just like tear down to the studs and rewrite. So I don't want anyone to have the misconception that this was a polished, what you see in front of you here is not anything like the first draft. So please don't hold yourselves to some standard that, isn't really there.
oh my gosh, I actually would love for you to touch on that even more, because I feel like that's all of our problems is we always compare ourselves. We shouldn't, but we do. And I was going off of your time. I was like, oh, well, she graduated and then published a book right after. Like, she wrote this in a few months. Like, how did that, And I just read the first paragraph and I was like, I quit. I can't. I'm an awful writer. I was just like so impressed by your skill.
That paragraph has been polished for like 10 years. So this book in its first draft form had been sitting on the shelf for probably 7 or 8 years. And I think it is important as writers, who've had some level of success to really sort of highlight that what you see in front of you is definitely not the first draft, because I think that's usually the hurdle that people have, right? I'm definitely the type of writer who is editing as I write. I have that editor over my shoulder, and I can often sort of grind to a halt and have no sort of momentum because I'm just like, this is terrible, this is terrible. But I think it's Anne Lamont who was like, just put that shitty first draft down. I don't know if we're allowed to swear, but put that first terrible draft down, right? And just you're the only one who has to see it. And no one has seen my first draft other than me. I just sort of talk about it because I don't want other writers to sort of have that same, you know, terrible a thought in their head that they have to turn in something super polished. Like it's iterative. Like do your first draft, let it be bad, let it sit and marinate for a little bit. Then maybe you do tear it down to the studs, but there was some really good foundational work in my first draft. So it wasn't all terrible, but it's definitely a process.
Yeah, we are our biggest critics. I'm sure it was not actually terrible to like that term, but
No, no, it
yeah.
really, really was. And I want everyone to know that it really was. It was basically a terrible game of Clue. You were following these two sort of very stereotypical detectives around from clue to clue. And it was like, they went and saw the farmer, and the farmer was like, it wasn't me, but go talk to this guy. And you went and talked to this guy, and it was like, it wasn't me, but, maybe it was like Colonel Mustard with the lead pipe. It was truly awful. I mean, I don't want to let's not varnish it. Like it was bad. I want people to know it was bad so that they have some comfort with their bad first drafts.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. I was like picturing like Clue and Wizard of Oz type of, you
Yeah,
know,
it was really like a quest of these two really sort of dumb, flat detectives that had no personality. And I'm like, all right. But again, it's foundational. So
yes. I mean, it's just like anything else or a relationship with your book, a relationship with a person. As long as the foundation is there, honey, you're good. You just got to
yeah,
keep
there's
working at it.
digging for the gold of it, right?
Yeah. So how involved was your editor then, since you kind of submitted it at a rough draft?
So they were very, very generous in the time they gave me. The 51st pages were in good shape, and they read them really quickly and said, you know what, I'd love to see a full draft. And I said, can I have a couple months? And they said, sure. So that those couple months was the tearing it down to the studs and rebuilding it. And there was a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of caffeine. I probably don't have a stomach lining left for all the coffee I was drinking just to stay up. But they were generous with the time that they gave me because they are a small press. I think they probably had some flexibility there. So I was able to turn in a slightly better second draft.
That's awesome. And so, what was your inspiration? Was it actually the game of Clue?
It wasn't. So when I was at UCLA, I did their extension program, just a certificate through them, but it was really good. One of the classes I took was just a writing the mystery novel. And I only took it because it was so far out of my normal. I, really had aspirations to be a literary type writer. But I thought, just dabbling in genre is going to be fun. It's going to be flexing a muscle I didn't really have. Um, and I think I had a lot of fun doing it. And it just sort of came from there.
Wow. Yeah, because as I was reading it, I was like, I feel like you probably have seen a lot of murder mystery, like movies, shows, read a lot of books on it because it just seemed it was so realistic. Like I believed everything, I could visualize everything. I like it was just so incredible. So I was wondering if that's always been your niche, but it sounds like it wasn't.
The genre wasn't so much my niche, but I do think, it was very heavily inspired by where I grew up. I grew up in the coal fields of Pennsylvania, sort of the middle part of the state. And so some people have said it has a little bit of a gothic feel to it, and I think that's probably what I leaned into the most. I think that that probably came easier to me. My hometown was on the other side of sort of the Rust Belt, just fully a very tiny town, 200 people in it, one traffic light. It had seen its heyday come and go and then some. And where I grew up, um, we were just surrounded by abandoned mines. And so you'd have, sort of the old rail bed from the train that used to take the coal out. You'd have all of these just coal tipples and all this infrastructure that had rusted and fallen in, and all of these old mines that were just leaching into the groundwater. So it was sort of a very haunted place to grow up. And so I think the atmospheric part really lended itself well to this murder mystery.
That makes perfect sense because I will say it has a cinematic feel to it. Like it's very well written in that sense too. That's
Thank
so
you.
cool. Um, wow. So what is your everyone always asks this question, what is your editing process like? So I know for this one in particular, your second draft, you kind of just had to overnight and just whip it up, right? But what about like your third, fourth drafts, assuming that you had that many?
So I did end up having about 4 drafts, and I think people who've compared it to building houses, I think that's pretty apt for me. The first draft was just throwing up the foundation and maybe some of the studs and framework, and then the second draft was kind of roughing out, the walls and the roof and everything. By the time it came to the third draft, it was really fine tuning. Second draft was tearing it down and getting the plot kind of solid. Third draft was really kind of layering in some of the atmospherics, making sure the dialogue was nice and tight. And the final draft was just, looking for tiny little plot holes or repetition of words, very sort of copy editing.
Great. Yeah, speaking of plot, without spoiling it for anyone, um, did you know as you were writing it who the murderer was? Or did that just
Yes.
happen? Okay.
No, no, I think that was between the first and second draft. I realized that to write the book I really wanted to write, I wanted to get in the psychology of the killer, and I wanted to make it more of a why done it than a who done it. And as a who done it, it really came across like a campy version of Clue. Um, but once I was like, okay, I'm going to give myself permission to give away who does it pretty early on, and that allowed me to sort of dig into the psychology and the history and everything. And when I think about those types of books that I do like, I think it is typically whodunits. I think Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, I think pretty much for the whole thing, you're following both the investigator and the killer. I don't want to give anything away. It's been out for a while, but you follow both. So you really get into the deep psychology of the killer. And I think it made it a much richer story than if it was just, um, the detective or the FBI agent just kind of trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I will say I was surprised when that happened because as I was following it, I was so in tune with the investigators and the detectives that I felt like I was one of them. And I was like, yeah, we're gonna figure this out together. Like, let's go, team. And then I was like blindsided. And at first I wasn't sure how I felt. I felt a little bit hurt, you know?
Yeah.
But then but then I actually love psychological thrillers and just psychology in general and like how character interiority and how people's brain works and the why. We're all always curious about the why. And there's a lot of controversy with that, right? People are like, well, you don't want to
Yeah.
give the spotlight to the criminal because then you're just,
Copycat
glorifying it.
killer. Oh
Yeah,
gosh. Yeah.
yeah, and the copycat killer and all of that, but it's like we're curious. Humans are curious. We want to know
I,
why, we want that closure. So I kind of did. I like that you did that. It was very unique.
Yeah, it was risky because I know that mystery readers, like they are very passionate about their genre. So I think, you're going to have a set of readers who are going to be disappointed because they do want to solve it. Like they want the puzzle. But I do think humans are, like you said, exactly. They're very curious and they want to know the why. And I think, um, it was a risk. I know some people weren't happy with it and they remained unhappy with it because there's no puzzle for them to solve. But I think there is a puzzle in figuring out the why as well. So,
I was gonna say for me, it was almost like presented as a murder mystery puzzle. So I was like, trusting the author and I was in the narrator. And then there was like a slight betrayal, but then it quickly turned into a curious there's a new puzzle. The puzzle of the why, the puzzle of the psychological reasoning behind a murder mystery. And all of a sudden, for me, it elevated it. But
Yeah.
again, like I actually have only read maybe one other murder mystery before. I usually read like coming of age stories. So I was, I didn't know what to expect exactly outside of like what I watched on TV.
Yeah.
So
Well, I hope you weren't traumatized by it.
no, I loved it. Honestly, it made me more curious. I was like, I could want to read more. It's like a murder and psychological thriller, and I really
Nice.
liked it. But so maybe, if anything, yours is like a gateway, how we were talking about earlier, to people who maybe have not read murder mystery, and it's like easing them into it in a unique and fun way. And so now I know that there's other options. There isn't
Yeah.
just cliche murder mystery because sometimes you have to be in the mood for those, right?
I think so. And honestly, if it were gonna try to remain a pure like who done it, I don't know if I had the skill to pull that off because it's almost like that joke from The Office where they're playing the murder mystery game and Dwight is like, I think it's the person I most medium suspect. It was hard. I think that's why the first draft came across so hokey is because I was trying to lay a groundwork that walked a fine line between it not being so obvious, but also like not um, pulling a fast one on the reader right at the end. Because I think that would have made readers even angrier, as if like suddenly it was, I don't know, the bellhop that you meet 3 pages in and never hear from again. Like it just, I think it might have been beyond my skill level. So
That's so true, honestly. And I feel like, at least for me, you revealed it at a good time. It wasn't too early, it wasn't too late. I feel like I would rather have this than, like you said, be so invested in a murder mystery and then you spend all that time reading it. Because it's not just like watching a movie, like it could take 6, 8 hours to read a book. You're invested and then you're so disappointed with the ending that like you feel like your time was wasted, right?
yeah, exactly. It's right at like the first act break into second. So I felt like that was a good time for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And at what point did you decide that? Like, was that always your goal, or you kind of figured that out on on your own?
It was, I had the luxury of setting the first draft down for so long that when I went and reread it, I'm like, it's just not working, but I think it could work as a why done it. And so I think putting some distance between the first draft and when I read it again, um, that was very, very helpful.
Yeah, that's another thing we like to talk about too, is how much time is enough time or too much time between drafts and not setting your eyes on it. For you, it was it years?
It was years, yeah. It was, I put the first draft down, I think, in 2019, and I didn't pick it up again until like 2021, so a couple years at least. And
Wow.
then between second, third, and fourth drafts, it was just constant. And I was so sick of these people and these characters in this book. I was glad to finally be done. But like once you've signed a contract, right, you don't have the luxury of time. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing. So, do you have anything else in the works right now that you're allowed to talk about?
yeah, so I am working on a sequel to Black Mariah. It's hasn't been picked up yet, but it has been sketched out. I'm starting to think about what a sequel might look like. I enjoyed writing this it's set in the beginning of the 70s. So I had thought about, playing around with the later 70s or the early 80s. There's so much, I think, sort of rich history in, recent history, although I guess the 80s have been a while now. I don't like to admit that. Um, but I think there's so much going like that you could do there. You have the Satanic Panic, you have a lot of cult activity. There's just so much rich, sort of creepy, spooky things that you could explore in this type of world. But I also do have a short story coming out in March. It is included in an anthology by Ink Alchemy Press out of New York. They have a short story anthology coming out called Whimsy. It's a literary antidote to doom and gloom. So it's a little more cheerful than murder.
That's cool. That must be interesting for you to switch off that murder brain to like cheerful when you're writing.
It has a happy ending, so, it's
Okay.
not my typical, but it's again a fun muscle to explore a little bit.
Yeah. When you finished the first Black Mariah, did you enter like you already knew that you wanted to have a sequel or you left it ambiguous for yourself?
I was okay ending it if I have to end it. If I never pick up these characters again, I will be okay. But at the end of it, I really did enjoy the detective characters a lot. And I think that was a big change between the first draft and the second draft too. I think the first draft, the main detective, Felix, read a lot like Sherlock from the BBC, just kind of like rude and cold, and I didn't like him very much. So in the second draft, I did sort of allow, it sounds so hokey to say, but I did sort of allow the character to take on their own feel and sort of step forward and be the character they wanted to be instead of me forcing them into a trope. And so I ended up really liking these characters, and I'd love to, explore them in future cases. But if this was their only, their big hurrah and he's back to, solving traffic infractions, it'll be okay too.
We want the best for our kids, right? But
Right, right.
anyway,
But I don't want to put him in too much pressure, right? Like, sometimes you're one and done on a big case.
that is awesome. It's true. I didn't believe when people said that your characters kind of take the lead, let them do what they want. It sounds so like
Sounds
magical.
so writerly, right? Like, yeah, let your characters
Yeah.
speak to you. Don't force them into a corner. Let them do what they want. Or, yeah, I'm having trouble reining in this character. It sounds very pretentious, but I think for writers who, I think we know that there's truth to it.
Yeah. Once you experience it, you're like, oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And then you
Letting the
get a little
main
bit
character.
worried that you're creating something that it might be outside of your control. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as a reader, it's hard to detach from characters or to accept when the series ends, especially. So I can't imagine what it's like to, depart from your own characters in a novel. I haven't gotten there yet. So
Yeah. Like I said, I am happy with how they ended, if they never get another story. But that's the lovely thing about being a writer too. You can always write. And even if I do believe that every story has a home, whether it is with a traditional publisher or a small publisher, or, you're publishing on your own through Kindle or KDP or whatever. I do think every story has a home. And so even if, no one ever picks up this story that I'm sort of sketching out now, I can always publish it myself. Or, I think there is merit to even just the act of creating, even if it never has an audience beyond me.
yes, I really think so. I think that's when you realize that you are passionate about writing is when you spend hours, weeks, months, years on something that no one else will ever see,
Yeah.
but you're still happy that you did it because it
Yeah.
just made you happy.
It's so tough, right? Because I feel like we're in this culture where we try to monetize everything, and hustle culture and grind culture. And I do think there is something very gratifying and human in just creating, even, and I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who said it, like there's merit in just creating mediocre art. So even if I would have just stopped with my terrible first draft, I still think there's merit in that. That's kind of what makes us human. And I don't think you have to try to monetize everything or hustle on every single, you know, artistic endeavor you have.
Preach, spoken like a true creative.
It's your creative with a day job who, has a day job so that she has dental insurance.
Oh man. Yeah, yeah, it's a struggle, but this is why we are so happy when we get people like you who have lived it, alumni and just published authors who like remind us, that we're not alone in the struggle. We're not alone in thinking that all of this is worth it, especially when our, 9 to 5 friends who aren't also creatives on the side judge us.
Yeah. Yeah, when they're like, "How much money are you making for this story?" And I'm like, "Oh, I sold this one for $20," which is what, Hemingway made when he sold a short story back in the day, and $20 went like paid your rent for 3 months or whatever. Like the inflation has not caught up, but so you really do have to be passionate about writing because you are probably not going to make Stephen King money.
Yep,
Yeah.
definitely. But maybe one can only.
Maybe, fingers crossed, but
Um, Another way to make money, which a lot of people are doing now, is creating film adaptations. Is that
yes.
something that you would be open to with this one?
I would be open to it. I did, while I was in the program, I did take a handful of screenwriting classes. So I took the pilot class as well as like a movie type class. So I could see like a limited series. I think there's still a lot of appetite for that with all the streaming services. So I would definitely I have one of the places I often start is with the mood board, which again sounds very like pretentious and writerly, but I do like to think of sort of the atmosphere, the vibe of a story, and I could do the same. I could really picture it on the screen.
Yes, absolutely. I can picture it in my head as I'm reading. So, and the fact that you have experience or at least have some knowledge on screenwriting would make you be
I
even
have
more.
a couple of A's in Harvard screenwriting classes, so it's going to translate effortlessly to the Hollywood scene, I'm sure.
I fully agree with that.
I'm ma I'm manifesting it for 2025, but yeah, I would be, thrilled to see it on the screen. Again, more for just the thrill of seeing your creation brought to life, but I'm not gonna lie and say the money wouldn't be nice too.
Right? Yes, we all want that passive income so we can just keep writing.
And keep buying books too, right? Like a lot of the money that I do make, which it is not much, I don't want anyone to think I'm making much, but I do usually parlay it back into like the indie bookstores and going out and buying. I like to buy books from people I've never heard from or, genres I don't typically do just to, sort of read broadly and with some depth.
Yes, like you said, working on those different muscles, pushing
Yeah.
our limits, figuring out
Yes.
things that we maybe never thought we would, like
Yeah.
or be good at.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, that's awesome. I do see some questions piling in here. I want to give people a chance to ask them themselves out loud. To spare you from my voice, or if you'd like me to read it, I can also read it for you. I think Luke might have left, but let's see. Does anyone have any questions at the top of their head they'd like to ask? Melissa, go for it.
Hi. Hi,
Hello.
Christine.
How's it
Um,
going?
Good. Congrats on your book.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. You touched on this a little bit, but I am curious. I mean, besides the idea of like sort of letting your characters develop, I thought it was interesting that you sort of didn't really like your main characters, it sounds like on your first draft. Like they were one-dimensional, sort of tropey.
Yes.
And how you, besides letting them sort of like take on a life of their own, like was there a specific process you used, or how did you kind of get them to the point where they are in the book now as likable? And would you have been okay with having a fairly unlikable main character?
Yeah, so I am all for unlikable characters. I actually think sometimes I worry sometimes that there's a drift to losing that appetite across the broader, literary spectrum. I don't need to like my main characters when I'm reading them or writing them. I think the process for letting them sort of be themselves really was driven by the plot. I think when I understood that the plot was not going to be this really convoluted whodunit and digging more into the why done it. And I'm trying to word this very carefully so I don't give away the spoilers. Um, I wanted to use the detective characters as a little bit of a counterpoint to the killer. And so the killer has a very specific psychology and history, and I wanted to explore, let Felix and Adam, the two main detectives, sort of be counterpoints in different aspects of that. And so once I was able to let go of the who done it and let it be a why done it, and let that killer have their time on page, I was then able to let those two detectives sort of be a counterpoint, and it just sort of loosening the plot or getting the plot under control just allowed them to sort of grow within the plot, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah,
It was
because you
worded
all
very awkwardly because I'm trying to avoid
no, I know
spoilers.
what you're saying, but you also they were good characters in the sense that it also helped build the atmosphere. Like especially with how am I saying it? Cuts
Kosmatka, yeah.
however you say his name, like it just his backstory with his parents, like filled in a
Yes.
lot of that sort of like 1970s mine atmosphere, like you were talking about. So I thought it was
Yes.
really, and I do applaud you for revealing the killer on chapter 6 because I was like, wait, what? It was a really, really interesting plot choice, but it really did work.
Oh, great. Yeah, Felix Kosmaka was in the original iteration just really having problems with everything. He hated the fact that he was this bright detective in a small town, and he also had problems with his his father. I'd originally written him as like a terrible father, and I was like, I can't have too many bad fathers in this thing. So I really just wanted to, soften him a little bit and give him a little bit of a break in some of his life. And so I think it came together pretty well.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that because I think sometimes when a character comes off a little too whiny, you
Yes.
lose a little interest or you just kind of you're not on their team anymore. You know what I
He
mean?
was very petulant. And then I was also like, I didn't want to be so tropey that he was like just the absolute scarred, like traumatized, entirely traumatized detective. Like I wanted to give him some, rays of sunshine in his life, in his past.
Yeah, and I think it made him more realistic
I
too.
think so, yeah.
And I do wanted to applaud you too, is like you made very seamless flashbacks. Like
Oh,
or-
thanks.
yeah, which to me is like I always struggle with that. It's like because sometimes it takes you out of the story, especially in something that is so high tense and high stakes, like a murder mystery. But it didn't. It was like sprinkled in at the right moments, which kind of made you be like, ah, that makes sense why this person's like this, or it just kind of flowed. And then it also made me grow more attached to the characters while also not losing sight of what's happening in present day. So I
Right.
think that was very well done.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I'm sure what draft was that in? Because
I think it was probably between like 2 and 3. I had a lot more backstory, a lot more flashbacks, and I think it's one of those things where I'm always a fan of overwriting and then cutting and editing because I feel like it's easier to take away than it is to try to add. So I definitely overwrote the exposition and the stuff that was sort of looking into the past, and then I whittled that down with each sort of iteration.
yeah, I find myself doing the same thing too, because it's like as you're writing, you know more than the reader's gonna know. So you just have to
Yes.
like put it all in there so you don't forget. But then you have to go back and like take it out and put it in like a scraps folder or something, but
Yeah.
what to take out and when to put it, I think that's really when the skills and the craft come into play. And it's really hard to do.
Yeah, and I would say for, the aspiring writers, I think it's important to take exactly like you said and keep them in a scraps folder. I had what I called, and I think they call it this in the movie industry, is like the Bible, like the story Bible. So even if I took something out, I sort of preserved it on another file. I use Scrivener, so I just had sort of a notes, folder so that if you do want to add something back, it's right there. I am not a fan of just like wholesale deleting things. I think it's smart to cut it and put it somewhere else because even if you don't put it back in your story, there always could be generative material for future stories.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like our future stories always have a little bit of a character from a different story, like or something that you cut from that character and you want to pick up in someone else.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
have you had a chance to do that yet? Like you write short stories, has that happened to you where you go back to your scraps?
I do. There was actually Melissa knows this one because I did it in our residency group. I wrote a ghost story, and the the scraps came from a different story. It had nothing to do with Black Mariah, but I did use some of the descriptors and some of like I don't know. I did use some of it into this ghost story that I'm trying to shop around right now. Yes, Dr. Maketa calls it compost.
Which her ghost story is also very good. Was that the one with, at the seashore?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, we'll have to drop all those links because we all want to read this. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's not been published yet. It's gotten some rejections. It's gotten some very nice rejections, so someday it'll get out there. I do think there's a home for it, but yeah, it's what I did in my residency, so Melissa's aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, it always just takes that one yes, right? That's what we always tell ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
but and even the fact that they were nice rejections is always like a step above,
Yeah,
right?
if you
You
know,
have to even tell you.
yeah, if they take the time to like write you a little note and say, "Hey, we've got 12 billion submissions to this one and you were one of the top million," I don't know. I always those always make me feel a little bit better, but I have where I did start to see my success in publishing is I switched from my mindset from how many things I could get accepted in a year to I want to get 50 rejections this year or I want to get 100 rejections so that because I'm very like I have a mind that is easily gamified. So if I can like sort of harness that energy, so that just always made sure I was sending it out to at least 100 places, right, or 100 plus places. Um, and so sort of gamifying the rejection process helped me get my stuff out there a lot more. Because the
Wow.
first year I sent stuff out, I sent it out. I sent out one short story and it was rejected. I sent it to the New Yorker of all places and it was rejected. And I'm like, great, this isn't for me. I'm never going to write again. And then I'm like, no, it's the New Yorker. Of course you were going to get rejected. So just I think that that change in mindset really helped me.
I wonder if we almost even do that as self-sabotage. So
I
that we
think
can just
so.
give up and be like, well, I tried.
It's so scary, right? Like the New Yorker, the Paris Review. It's like, well, no, they think I'm terrible. So what the reality is they probably didn't even read it. They probably read like, if at all, a sentence, or they read my cover letter, and my cover letter was like, oh, this is a story about ghosts, and they're like, no, not for us. And so, yeah, I think there probably was a little bit of self-sabotage. I also think there's a little bit of delusion. Um, the Paris Review or the New Yorker is not going to take an unknown who, is an accountant by day. So,
Yeah. I think one quality that a writer absolutely needs to have that is probably the most challenging, I think, is patience.
yes.
But we all just want to be famous novelists overnight because it's such a long road and it's so hard. And we have people in the back of our heads. It's like, so you finished your book a month ago. Why aren't you famous? Like, why
So
aren't you?
it's so interesting, right? Because we do have like the non-writers who are just like, I could do that or yeah, like but we also hear the stories of like that person who does send their first, short story to the New Yorker and they pick it up and it's made into a movie and they sell like a book of short stories. And so I feel like those stories sort of get into our heads too. So I think it's important to talk about like sort of the hard work of it and the rejection of it and how it really is a grind sometimes. Because it is work at the end of the day. It is a business. So I think it's important to
Absolutely.
offset those, who was the woman who wrote Cat People? She's the one I always think of because she sold that story and it turned into a short story collection and I think they made a movie of it. And I think, yes, growing a thick skin is definitely part of it.
Yeah, I know. We had in the writer's residency, we had Paul Harding. He was the example of how he just became like famous overnight, basically. It was like his first book and it just went crazy. And then we had an example from someone else where it was taking them a little bit longer. So it's good to have um diversity and different
Yeah.
types of representation is the word I was looking for. But that's why we also want to spotlight people who worked hard and tell us what we don't want to hear, but we need to
Yes.
do.
Well, I think it's important to remember like Stephen King, this was back when they would send rejections, but he used to put his rejections on a nail on the wall. And he had so many that the nail fell out of the wall. So that was all before he published Carrie and, is now a household name and has written 1,000 books and turned into 1,000 movies. And so even Stephen King had so many rejections.
I love that. You know what? Maybe we should print our rejections. Let's all print our rejections and start putting them against the wall.
So if everyone here needs a reinsurance, I sent in a short story once and I got a response within 2 hours of submitting it with one word that just said no. So that can be your baseline for like if of all the things, like you can get a form rejection, sometimes you just never hear back and assume that, it fell through the cracks. But like 2 hours later, no, that's where we're at.
That is savage. That is truly
But that's exactly, so you can go from like a 2 hour no to, a debut novel. It's all valid. It's all out
yeah.
there.
I love it. Danny said, at least they didn't say unsubscribe.
Lose our email. Never, yeah, I'm blocked on their submittable probably.
Please
It's
do not
okay.
contact us again. No.
It's fine.
I do have a question here from George. He said, how did you find a publisher for your book? He's working while listening.
Oh yeah, no worries. So I had written a short story and sent it into an anthology by a up and coming publisher. They're called Run Amok Crime. They were publishing this anthology called Jacked. This is it right here. But it's an anthology of crime fiction, and this was sort of their entry into the publisher's world. And so they bought my short story, they put it in that anthology, and then a couple months later they started looking for novels to publish, and they had reached out to me and said, "Hey, we liked your short story. Do you happen to have a novel?" I don't have an agent. It was unagented. It was a very unconventional way to get a novel published. So it's but I think it does highlight the idea of, the publishing industry is very big, but also very small at the same time. So, the connections you make on a short story anthology or, someone you meet at a bookstore or whatever, I think those people can help you along your way.
Yes, we should not underestimate word of mouth, marketing, networking, all of those things. And, that even puts, kind of a spotlight on what I've been thinking is I'm so focused on just getting my novel finished, getting it polished, getting that published, that I don't take a minute to just write a side project, write a short story that's probably maybe easier to get published. A blog, anything to kind of have that background and start laying those eggs. So
Mhm.
hearing this, I'm like, I need to kind of just stop obsessing over this one story. Because if they're like, okay, this is great, what else you got? I'm gonna be like, give me like 5 years. I'll get back.
I think short stories are great for that. And it helps give you a little bit of distance because I have a novel that I was working on all through the program, and I've been torturing myself with it for years, and so I had to put it down because of Black Mariah. But I think we all tend to torture ourselves over our projects, and we go back in and we fine tune it and we take a word out, and then a month later we add that word back in, and we're always moving commas around. So I think, putting it down to let it breathe for a little bit, just to write, a short story, flash fiction, a poem. I have some poems published. They're not great. I'm never going to be the poet laureate, but like just different ways you can sort of keep your writing muscle limber, but just to give your big project that's sort of haunting you, just give it some time and, some space and distance, like, a bad ex, and then maybe come back to it. Um, but I feel like with Black Mariah, I had to put down some of the projects that were torturing me, and I'm starting to pick them up now in 2025, and it feels much healthier now. It feels less like we're going to end up torturing each other. So I think
Yeah,
that's a good mindset to have.
I agree. Even just setting my manuscript down for 2 months, I almost had a wave of inspiration when I picked it up again, not because I was like excited, but more so because I was like, how did I think that this was good? Why did I thought that this was good, and then you give it 2 months and you go back to it and you're just like, I need to fix this. This is embarrassing. Like, and
That's
that's
the
just
thing,
because
right? Is it embarrassing or is it just that first draft? Like, is it just, you know,
it
I
was
don't
her
know.
it was her third, but I will say I started reading again, and I started,
Yeah.
I was able to kind of work that muscle, and it wasn't so, I do need to work on my word choice, like, positive mindset, but it was that idea of sometimes you need to take a break, read different genres, read other people who inspire you to then kind of, challenge yourself and be better, and then go back to your work and just have that mindset of, oh, I got this, I can make this better.
Yeah. I think definitely like those projects that we're just haunted by, I think they just drain our batteries. So if we can find other ways to like recharge it, whether it's reading or other projects or taking a walk or just putting down writing altogether for a little bit, I think it's really important. Because I will tell you, The Hour of Lead is the book that I've been fussing with for 5 years when I was in this program. It has just been like I've deleted it, I've started it over again, I've put it in present tense, I put it in past tense. Like it feels like a bad relationship.
Toxic.
Yeah, right. But I can't quit it. Like we're entwined. We're soulmates, me and this terrible book, torturing each other.
I love that. I do want to keep opening it up to questions, so if anyone wants to
Yeah,
just chime in, just go
yeah,
for
I
it.
got one. Um, okay. Thank you, by the way, for everything. I always like, it's really cool to hear people that have done it talk about their process. So if you could recommend or say what the most impactful extension school class that you took
Oh,
that got you to like your book, like what would it be?
oof. Oh, that's a thoughtful question. Ugh. I almost want to say it would probably be the intermediate screenwriting class, which is so I had a lot of good prose classes, right? Like I took the novel class, I took short story, I took everything that Katie Cohn and Dr. Maketa taught. But I really think it was the screenwriting class with its focus on um, really making sure each scene was doing something. Because in a feature, you've got maybe 90 pages, between 90 pages and 120 pages of a screenplay to tell your story. And that's not a lot of time at all because it's a lot of it's white space, right? So you really have to be impactful, make sure that you don't have like tons of gratuitous description, tons of dialogue that's really not saying anything, like people saying hi and bye to each other, and sort of that you really want to make sure that your word choice is tight and your word count, every word that you put in your book is doing, double duty if it can. So I really think it was the screenwriting class because it really focused me in. I could write a novel in 300,000 words and it would just be a meandering nightmare full of description and um, little side plots and B plots and C plots. So I really think screenwriting is smart for teaching you how to focus on a story and tell the story and get in and out in a thoughtful, quick way.
Thanks, that's awesome.
Yeah, sure.
Who taught that when you took it? You remember?
It was Susan Steinberg, but it was the class where the teen mom was in it. So it was very like there's a lot of drama in it. It was a very interesting class, but Susan Steinberg's great. Like
Awesome.
yeah, she's wonderful. And I took just for fun, I took Wayne Wilson's class as well this past semester, just not as a degree student, just he teaches the advanced one and he's fantastic too. I would highly recommend him.
Wow. How about any class that you ran out of credits and you wish you would have taken that you did not take?
There is that class, it's like the art of the pitch. and I got into it the 1 year. And then we were supposed to, like in our first project, we were supposed to pitch existing media. And I was so lost in the assignment that I dropped it and never could get in again. And I really am kicking myself for dropping it. I just had a panic. Like, I think a lot of writers, I'm definitely one of them. I don't want to be a stereotype, but I often am. I'm very introverted. I don't love selling my stuff. I don't love the idea of standing with a publisher in an elevator and trying to give my pitch because I'm just very, I don't know, I just don't like talking about myself or trying to sell my work, but I really wish I would have had the wisdom to stay in with that instead of dropping it and panicking and leaving and letting one
Oh,
of the waitlist people get in instead.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
a lot of us share that sentiment. I'm like a fourth draft in. I'm starting my fourth draft, and still, when someone asks me, "What is your book about?" I'm like, "The."
It's wild. Like I wrote it. I mean, I've read it a million times. I wrote it 4 times and people are like, "Yeah, what's Black Mariah about?" And I'm like, "Well, it's about a murder and there's people trying to solve it." And it's like, I don't know, like it's a really weird phenomenon.
Yeah, because you don't want to sound cliche, but then also, how do you say so much in so little words and
Yeah.
stand out?
And
I,
the art of the pitch could have taught me that. And I had it within my grasp and I dropped it like a coward and ran. So I've heard that it's really good. I know people who've gone through it, so
honestly, I feel like that should have been required.
it should have been, hold my feet to the fire and make me take it.
But that leads to one of another question is what tips do you have for people post graduation? Is there a moment where you're just kind of like, thank goodness I'm done, or are you kind of like sad?
I'm sad, like I was sad because I definitely am driven by like I said, I'm very gamified. So if I know that there's an A on the other side of this course, and I know that I have to turn stuff in. It's so easy when I know I have assignments or I know I have to turn in my 51st pages. So I think, and I feel like I've heard that from other people too who've graduated. So I think really trying to find a practice that works for you that holds you accountable, whether it's like a writing group or maybe taking more classes. I don't know. I think you can sort of get classed out at some point. What more can you learn? You can always learn, but for the money, it might not be worth it. But I think trying to find a discipline to your writing practice that works for you. And for me, it's really, again, sort of gamifying my word count. And I do have a writing group. Some of them are on here. They're very lovely. They're great at holding me accountable too. Like we do sort of talk about like page exchanges and stuff. So that helps. But if I didn't have some sort of system, I'd probably never write again. I would just think about writing.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree. And that's why we're also, shameless plug, creating this community, right? So that we can hold each other accountable. We have those workshops, we have the tools, especially set up for alumni when we feel like, well, now what? And it's so easy to just let those darlings that we wrote just collect dust and it
Yeah,
never
exactly.
a day.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so easy to just think about it and talk about it and not actually do it. And, for me, like I said, if I had an A on the other side, it was easy to do. Black Mariah, I think, gave me a little bit of an out. So 2025, I'm trying to focus on getting that practice down
Yeah.
solid.
Yeah. And it changes as your life changes too, right? Like
Oh
maybe
yeah.
when you were single, it was easier to have a certain thing. And then you get married, or you have kids, or something happens in your life, you have to change your whole system again, your routine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think if it's, important, I think you also have to be kind of protective of that time and space. Kind of like a room of your own. If you've got so much, if you have like family obligations, I don't have kids, so I think I do sort of have, I have more time than a lot of people. I also have a lot of pets, so, give and take. Um, the dogs are usually more forgiving about me writing as long as I'm writing near them and, petting them with my foot. Um, but I think, yeah, trying to cordon off your time and saying, this is my writing time. So, can my family give me some space and let me have it? Because
Yeah,
it's easy to say, I'm not going to write today. I have to make dinner, or I'm not going to write. I'm going to whatever, like insert excuse here. So being protective of your time is important.
I love that. Setting boundaries and making sure you see to them. It's hard, but it's important.
Yeah, very hard.
Yes, I love that. These are all amazing tips. Does anyone else have any last minute questions before we let Christine go?
Melissa did have the question if I was seeking an agent, and I do have sort of a running list of agents I am interested in querying when I'm at the querying point.
Good. And do you keep an actual physical list or an Excel spreadsheet or?
I have an Excel spreadsheet, so I'm an accountant by trade during the day. So I love me a good Excel spreadsheet. I've got all sorts of like conditional formatting to help me with things, just really pretty it up.
Yes, see, so that other degree or that other job does come into play. It
It
does
does.
play a role.
And the writing helps in my accounting life because I can, I write really nice memos at work.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yes, Jennifer says you have amazing spreadsheets, so you might have to, have a class on that.
Jennifer's in my writing group, so she's been tasked with coming here and saying nice things. Because I thought my brother might be here, like I said. He likes to come to these things and throw bogey questions into the chat just to be a troublesome younger brother, but he's not here today, so.
I
Can I
love
ask
it.
a question? Since you're an accountant, maybe, did you, when you got your publishing contract, did you set yourself up as a sole proprietor or an LLC or anything like that?
I did not. This is a very, very, very small publisher. My advance was tiny. I think my earning potential is going to be tiny. I think the average indie publisher, whether they're with a very small publisher or they're doing the KDP things, I think if you clear a couple $100, I think you're in good shape or you're at the average. So I did think about like if I get an agent or if I get a deal or if it goes to film rights or something like that, that's when I would revisit that decision. But right now, the earning potential, the earnings that I've had are so low that there's really no benefit to doing that.
So as far as writing off expenses and all of that, you could just write it off of your regular taxes then.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a
Okay.
little bit of extra income. I think it's on a 1099. So it's not enough to bump me into another bracket at all.
Not yet.
Thank you.
Not yet. Yeah. That's a good question though. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we could sit here all day. There's so many questions. It's just, there's a lot that goes into it that we don't think about, that people don't know.
Yeah.
So.
So I do have a website. So and I am on Instagram. I think that's the only social media I'm on other than Reddit. But Reddit is mostly just for my pasta making hobby. And cute pictures of dogs. So you're not going to really find me there unless you're into the pasta making. But if anyone wants to follow me on Instagram or reach out to me through my website, my email is on my website as well. And there's also one of those contact boxes. But certainly the more the merrier. We're all friends here. We're all alum and fellow writers. So if anyone ever has a question or anything like that, they're always free to reach out.
I love it. And is your website christineboyer.com or what is it?
It is Christine-Boyer.com because some yoga woman named Christine Boyer got the main domain. And they haven't done anything with it, but they're just sitting on it. So I tried to reach out and get it from her and she ignored me. So I can put it in chat real quick.
Yes, please drop all of that. We will also put that on our socials as well. And that's another last tip. If you can get your domain now, get it.
Get it now. Also, get your headshots now because my headshot for this and everything else has been a picture of me from the dog park like 5, 6 years ago. It's just me with my Newfoundland cropped out. She's passed since then, so rest in peace, Ruby. But get some good pictures now because I don't have a single good one other than this, and I don't look like that anymore, so it's the best I can do.
It is a great picture. The only difference was like, oh, you got bangs.
I got bangs now. I've had bangs since 2020, but I also have not had any good pictures since then. It was just me and my dog at the dog park. So yeah, get your domain now, get your pictures now, or, make a friend who knows how to take good pictures.
Yes, wise, wise words. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Christine, for being here and all of your insight. We truly, truly appreciate it.
Thanks for
Everyone,
having me. It was a lot of fun. It was good to see everyone.
yeah, so nice. And we will put this on YouTube too. So if anyone wants to
Oh
read
God,
the link,
horrifying.
don't worry, Danny always makes us look better than we actually are live.
I dropped a swear word. Yeah, any filters or, like nice washes of color you want to add to me, that would be great. Because I have also not mastered the art of Zoom makeup or lighting, so I often come across as ghastly, just calling from the other side.
Make us.
You already look great. But I'll do what I
You're
can.
very kind. Thank you. No
Oh
worries.
my gosh, I love it. All right, well, I guess we can stop the recording and